Hollow Knight Silksong survive the hype train, or was it crushed like a bug? Please join us for this Cheapness Affordable Gaming review of Hollow Knight Silksong and try and figure out whether or not it's better than the original. A monumental task, since the original was so good not because it was groundbreaking, but because it took an old idea and really polished it. And since they seem to be working with the same base elements, how much could it truly have improved? I'm sorry, having a ridiculously cute mascot isn't enough to say that outright. Look at this cute Lyron looking thing. It's not like we can just look at the Steam score. I mean, sure, there is a disparity in terms of percentage and amount of reviews, but that doesn't necessarily mean that much, because Hollow Knight had a great many more years to accrue that amount, and sometimes people tend to be quite harsh on sequels, especially since they were expecting so much. But ultimately, I would argue it's better, but it won't be for everyone, because of one main reason. Because Team Cherry made a clear concerted effort to differentiate it from the original, mainly located in the gameplay realm. And first of all, yes, what you heard is accurate. This game is harder than the original. Why do I sound so sure? Well, to start with, Silksong only has 6 more bosses, yet it took me like 32 more hours to complete it. And I don't think I even fought all of them, but I made a fair go of it. 96% complete, and the original I got 106 out of 112%, so effectively done. So probably at least some of the hours were gained through padding the game with difficulty. I mean, the final boss took me at least 2 hours. I mean, this big old fly thing took me an hour on stream, so it definitely is a preference thing, because sometimes this game feels more like a Souls-like than metroidvania. Ooh, I lost 1,000 rosaries, one of the game's currencies, especially since a lot of the difficulty comes from improved design or capabilities. Enemy attack patterns are more erratic now, harder to predict, even for some basic enemies. These bird things don't get the same amount of air with each flap. Oh, you're just gonna drop onto me now, alright. And actually seem to interact with the terrain. The flying enemies are influenced by the platforms above them, and these irritating jumping ones by the walls and platforms they hop on. I shouldn't be struggling with these basic enemies. I didn't know you could do that. And most of the bosses do multi-phase, and sometimes a great deal could be going on the screen. And sure, this produces a lot of rage, but I would argue for a lot of us it is doable, and it can be quite rewarding. Me making these noises felt worthwhile afterwards. Okay. But I'm the kind of person that blames myself when I struggle with a game. If you're like me, you can swarm up to it. Absolute punishment. And while a lot of this difficulty is fair, some attacks take 2 bits of health, and on other occasions this game does something a great deal of gamers would consider unforgivable. It registers double hits. Yes, sometimes you're not invulnerable after the attack, and can get hit a second time. Sure, you could argue technically these are 2 different attacks, just done in quick succession, but even if that was fine. Firstly, this isn't always the case. Secondly, sometimes the basic enemies can do this. What gives this early enemy the right to slash me twice? And then there are a couple things in the maybe column that perhaps add to the difficulty. For instance, while platforming usually isn't that hard, they expect you to utilize your usually diagonal downward attack upon items like these. Tricky but very satisfying once you get the hang of it, but admittedly on rare occasions, the gauntlet you have to traverse is either on the trickier side, or also has enemies, or is a long ways away from another bench to respawn at. Or may have annoying curveballs, like this maggoty water that will use up your bind before you're able to heal again. This area is a nightmare, and I don't even have the map for it yet. But in all fairness, these instances tend to be fairly late game, or mid game if you go about exploring where you shouldn't yet, like I do. I was here way too early. By the way, if you want me to be successful enough to remain parasite free, then please consider liking and subscribing. Maybe comment if you think Silksong is too hard. But no pressure though, I'm grateful you've even watched. Don't worry though, not all of the game's differences are so contentious. Like in the previous game, you do collect items to aid you in battle, but unlike Hollow Knight's charms, Silksong's tools are divided into 3 areas. They are a touch difficult to explain because they didn't name them, but you get the yellow passive ones. They usually do things like pinpoint your location on the map or increase the amount of rosaries and shards you earn. That's a different currency we'll talk about in a bit. The blue items that are also passive, but tend to have more of a combat effect, like influencing your bind action or your attack, etc. And then we get the final group, the red tools, and this is massively different. They are actually active use tools, mostly ranged attacks. Throwing knives, bombs, weirder stuff. You have a certain amount of them, and they replenish when you sit at benches, as long as you have enough shards to construct them. Who knew Hornet was such a crafty little bug? And this is so big, firstly because Hollow Knight didn't have a ranged attack really, at least one that didn't take silk, or that you kind of didn't control. So it can give a whole different dimension to combat, and secondly, they all do different things. So arguably most of the effort into changing up the gameplay went here, going from the passive charms to a bunch of different attacks you can choose depending on your preference. What's more, you can only equip certain amounts of these tools depending on what crest you have equipped. Another thing you can find and unlock, and not only do they have different slots, they have different bind actions, and even changed the way Hornet slashes her needle. Plus you get silk powers, different attacks you can find and equip that also expend silk like your binding action. Sure, I kind of avoided them at first, like the previous game's spells, except there are more of them this time. I avoided using them in the last game too, because usually a heal was worth more than an attack, but sometimes that can be nice. Combat is a bit more complex. I would argue this is an objective improvement, but if you're already tripped up by the difficulty, you might not be keen on having more things to think about. Plus it's kind of annoying if you've run out of shards and still haven't killed the boss you're grinding on. Then you actually go on to the Traversal, which mechanically, even though there are different powers now, and sometimes more challenging platform sections, ultimately it's very similar in this regard. Spoiler alert, if it irritated you in Hollow Knight that double jump was pretty much the last Traversal power you get, it's kind of the case here again. Thanks for watching so far. Please stick around for about 18 seconds, it's intro time. What has changed though is that exploration feels a bit different, in that sometimes the secret areas you reach don't really have anything that special. Maybe a piece of lore, or rosaries or shards. And what's wrong with that, you may ask? Well, technically speaking, you can grind both of those currencies, and the lore they tend to give you is an incredibly small chunk. Sure, sometimes you find tools, or like in the previous one, instead of grubs, you find fleas. Fleas to meet you. Absolute punishment. Or spool fragments to increase your silk's capacity, or shard fragments like in the last game to increase your health. But, especially at the start, you won't necessarily find the most satisfying secrets. Although there's an argument to be made that that's a bit more realistic, you're not always gonna find something important in the middle of nowhere beyond the wall. And to the game's credit, even though some of it is padded by difficulty, it's not exactly lacking in content. I mean, if it was just difficulty, making it longer, I probably wouldn't have had as much fun as I did. Plus, there is a big old chunk of content at the end that you can miss if you don't know how to access it and lack a completionist streak. That has more bosses, and you can't even get the final 4 mask shards until you access it. The map even changes a bit. It's just enough to not feel tacked on, to be a worthwhile addition, and Team Cherry were completely willing and brave enough to put it somewhere where a lot of people just wouldn't bother. Bravo! Plus they've created like 200 more enemies. Sure, some of them are similar to those in the previous game, but some definitely are not. The approach to narrative also changed, in that now our character actually speaks. And now we're dealing in a kingdom that's dying, not a kingdom that's dead, which does change the tone considerably. We actually have insects to save now. Plus they tell a bit more than show, Hornet can even become a paragon of sorts. It's not amazing, I would say this is lateral movement, but some of Farloom's bugs are also cute and quirky. Is she singing French? And he likes to shimmy. And there are touching moments. The mother's love thing does work, for instance. Lace's apathy. They even have wishes now. Overt side quests. A lot of times where you have to track bugs for annihilation or rescue. Also arguably lateral movement is with different soundtrack. It still sounds good. I especially love the clockwork area. And lastly, we have the area of the game where I thought the least amount of progress would be made. Visually, I mean, you saw trailers. At first glance, it didn't look that different. And sure, in some ways, the improvements are marginal, but they did improve more foreground and background elements. Things that move. Sometimes a sort of 3D effect going on. Dead bugs don't just fade away. If their bodies fall onto spikes, you hear it. And they may be carried away by ants. A small thing, but they improved where they could, and probably there are more details too. And they did shake up the color palette a bit. The previous game was mostly greys, whites, blacks, blues. Very melancholic. Color didn't really start to pop, change up a bit, until after they'd released the DLCs. And even then, there wasn't that much red. And while it's still pale a lot of the time, they've added a great deal of magma, found excuses to add some red, spread out the plants a bit more evenly, and they managed to spread out the color scheme while still keeping all of these areas distinct. You can pretty much on sight telling which one of the many areas you are. Plus, as mentioned, some of the bugs are as cute as a bug in a rug. As mentioned, it took me like 82 hours to complete, 96% of the game, and they haven't increased the base price that much from the original, as you can get it full price for 185 rand. That means while it's still this new, I know some of you are surprised I'm playing something this new, without a sale price, it has a good value for money at 2 rand 26 cents per hour of gameplay, which is quite good. Excellent for something that's not on sale. Although please remember, I'm a mild completionist, and a lot of you will be done quite a bit sooner. Also, this is one of those games where the dollar and pound value for money isn't as good as the rand value for money, but it's still okay. Still quite good for a game that's not on sale. Previous one doesn't have that much better value for money, even though I reviewed it with a 50% off. But the download, it is fairly big, 7.57 gigabytes on the hard drive, and it doesn't work on the Warhorse. I mean, what was I expecting? The previous one lagged, but stereotypically, I would say it's kid-friendly. Maybe there are some grimly sad moments, and some of the narrow corridors are dark, but I'd say kids can handle it. The game has beautiful hand-drawn visuals, and they even managed to make it prettier than the previous game. Inject a bit more color into it, keep the many areas distinct, add more frills, design some cute bugs, the Bell Beast especially, but if you want to be harsh, only marginal improvement could have been gained for the 2D space. But is it really a con to say this game looks as good as Hollow Knight? And musically it's good, didn't always wow me, and perhaps not better than the previous game, but still good, and contributes to a different atmosphere, an arguably more hopeful one when you combine it with the more overt storytelling, and having the bugs not be dead. I did enjoy some of the tracks. Speaking of story, there's more narrative now. On the whole it's okay, but it does have some touching moments. Hornet is less of a question mark than the previous game's protagonist. Plus it does have some merit. Gameplay wise it is great, but they've added active use tools, and so many of them too. Plus silk powers and crests, it gives more combat choice and complexity, and the combat and traversal is as tight as it used to be, which is good. There's still plenty to find. If a great deal of what you find is grindable currency, it's still a bit of a collectathon with satisfying secrets, if some of the secrets may be a bit of a letdown on occasion. The game has a great deal of content, even, spoiler alert, an entirely hidden third act that a great deal of people could miss. Plus they've come up with a great deal more enemies. On the maybe side, the thing that makes or breaks this game for you, this game is hard. In some ways admirably, erratic, hard to predict enemies, with a lot of different attacks, multiple phases, in other ways less so. For instance, long distances to benches, or double hits. That brings us to the cons. It should also be its own con. Enemies can double hit you. What? Come on, play it. Team Cherry did a great job trying to differentiate this game, and while it's difficult, it's worth sticking it out. It's quite refined, I didn't see many bugs. Sure, when I was frustrated it felt shellish, but it was definitely fun enough that after a while I was infested. Are those enough insect puns to end on?